Did you know that the Granite State's most famous mountain isn't even made of granite? Or that New Hampshire's loneliest peak is the second most climbed mountain on Earth? How about the fact that the state has a floating forest that literally drifts with the wind? Well, there are plenty of wild facts about New Hampshire that will twist your mind. And we have 50 of them for you, so let's get right into it. Fact 50. Ruggles Mine's Giant Chasm. Tucked into the hills of Grafton lies one of the most surreal places in New England, a man-made cave that looks like it belongs on another planet. Ruggles Mine, North America's first mica mine, is a 40-foot deep cathedral carved straight into the rock. A single 15-foot stone pillar holds up the circular ceiling, and light shines across walls lined with glittering mica, amethyst, rose quartz, and garnet. It's part museum, part underground fantasy world, even hiding traces of uranium ore if you know where to look. First opened in 1803 and long abandoned, it reopened to the public in 2024, letting a new generation wander through New Hampshire's most dazzling hidden chamber. Fact 49. The Chief Carved by Fire. Sometimes disaster leaves behind beauty. After a wildfire tore through Mount Pimickawasit in the early 1900s, it exposed a hidden formation in the cliffs. A perfect profile of an Abenaki chief staring out across Franconia Notch. Locals named it Indian Head, and from the highway you can see the face, nose, chin, and even a crown of trees for hair. The portrait wasn't carved by hand or planned, it was revealed by chance, the mountain scar becoming its identity. Today there's a small park and lookout where thousands stop each year to see the chief watching over the valleys he's ruled for a century. Fact 48. Frog Rock's lost tourist fame. Before Instagram made roadside oddities cool again, travelers came here to see a rock that looks like a frog. Deep in the woods near New Boston, a 10-foot granite boulder nicknamed Bullfrog Rock once drew Victorian-era tourists from Boston who'd picnic under its stony croak. For decades, it was one of New Hampshire's most photographed oddities, until the forest swallowed it back up. Now only locals know the trail, and the old frog sits moss-covered and forgotten. Way before the internet made weird attractions famous, New Hampshire already had them. They just lived on postcards instead of screens. Fact 47. The boulder that changed the border. In 1652, surveyors from the Massachusetts Bay Colony carved markings into a huge glacial rock near modern-day Laconia to claim the land for Governor Endicott. They thought they were setting a boundary. Instead, they miscalculated so badly that their mistake gave New Hampshire extra territory. When the line was finalized years later, that carved boulder, now called Endicott Rock, is considered America's oldest public monument, and one of its funniest accidents, a 370-year-old error that literally made New Hampshire bigger. The markings are still visible today, half submerged in the lake, where a math error became history. Fact 46. The Old Man rises again. When the Old Man of the Mountain collapsed in 2003, it felt like the whole state lost a piece of itself. But New Hampshire didn't move on. It rebuilt him in spirit. At Franconia Notch, engineers created a memorial plaza with steel beams positioned so that from one exact angle, the outlines lined up perfectly with the cliff, recreating the face that once gazed over the valley. It's part sculpture, part optical illusion, and completely on brand for a state that refuses to let nature have the last word. The old man may have fallen, but his shadow still looks down on the mountains he once ruled. Fact 45. The river that carved its own art gallery. If rivers could sculpt, the Cold River would be Michelangelo. At Sculpted Rock's natural area in Hebron, it's spent thousands of years carving solid granite into a gallery of smooth curves, polished bowls, and natural bridges. The gorge looks handcrafted, with swirling hollows that look like everything from abstract art to animal faces. One even looks suspiciously like a bear if you squint just right. But this isn't art by design, it's erosion with patience. Every curve, every ripple in the rock tells the story of water grinding stone grain by grain, nature's version of slow-motion sculpture. Fact 44. The Basin's glacial pothole. Just outside Lincoln sits the Basin, proof that glaciers were the original engineers. Thousands of years ago, meltwater trapped pebbles in a pocket of granite and spun them like a drill bit until they bored out a flawless 30-foot wide pothole. It's so perfectly round it looks like someone manufactured it with machinery, but it's 100% natural. Henry David Thoreau called it the most remarkable curiosity of its kind in New England, and he wasn't exaggerating. Today, water still swirls through its polished walls, tracing the same motion that shaped it in the Ice Age. A granite mixing bowl carved by time itself. Fact 43. Chicken Farmer Rock, the Love Note. On a Newbury dirt road, a massive boulder bears one of New Hampshire's most endearing mysteries. Chicken Farmer, I still love you, painted in large white letters. Someone spray painted this cryptic declaration in the 1980s, and nobody's definitively identified the chicken farmer or the lovesick painter. Instead of washing away, the graffiti became cherished. Locals protected, touching up faded letters to preserve this anonymous love story, or maybe heartbreak, immortalized on stone. Tourists make pilgrimages to photograph it. What started as crude vandalism evolved into beloved folk art. New Hampshire's strangest Valentine, where a roadside rock became the unlikely canvas for someone's unfinished love story. Fact 42. Mount Washington's famously awful weather. Mount Washington is terrifying. Some say it's the mountain that never sleeps. This 6,288-foot peak endures hurricane-force winds roughly 110 days annually, receives over 25 feet of snow each year, and occasionally throws ice storms at hikers in July. Temperature swings are legendary. 70 degrees Fahrenheit sunshine can transform into whiteout blizzards within minutes. The summit sits where three major storm tracks converge, creating meteorological chaos that earned it the unofficial title, Home of the World's Worst Weather. It's extreme enough that scientists maintain a year-round observatory there specifically to study conditions that shouldn't exist at such modest elevation. Fact 41. Mount Washington's record winds. So how windy does this bad boy get? Well, on April 12, 1934, weather observers huddled in Mount Washington's summit building recorded a wind gust of 231 miles per hour, faster than Category 5 hurricane winds, and shattering the world record for 62 years. The anemometer nearly exploded under the force, and observers crawled on hands and knees to avoid being swept off the mountain. This wasn't just a spike. Sustained winds topped 100 miles per hour for hours. The Mount Washington Observatory, built in 1932 specifically to study the peak's notorious weather, captured a measurement within 2 years that made headlines worldwide. Even modern instruments have never recorded anything close since, making that 1934 gust an enduring testament on the mountain's meteorological fury. Fact 40. Anchored to the rock. Yes, there's more. Every structure near Mount Washington summit looks like it's preparing for liftoff. Because without massive steel chains bolted into bedrock, it would be. The tip-top house, weather observatory, and even the gift shop are braced with thick cables wrapped around buildings like they're cargo on a storm-tossed ship. It's the only location on Earth where architects seriously calculated, will this building take off? And decided industrial-strength chains were non-negotiable. Fact 39. Frankenstein's namesake cliff. No thunder, no mad scientist. Just a 1,400-foot cliff and a misunderstood name. Frankenstein Cliff, towering above Crawford Notch, sounds like it should be straight out of a horror movie. But it's actually named after Godfrey Frankenstein, a 19th century German-American painter who owned the land. The name predated Mary Shelley's novel's American fame, and has nothing to do with the monster. Though that hasn't stopped hikers from making the connection. Today, the sheer granite face attracts climbers, artists, and storm chasers who swear lightning likes to strike there anyway. The name might be innocent, but the atmosphere, unmistakably intense. Fact 38. The 12 million pound boulder that shouldn't exist. Meet Madison Boulder, New Hampshire's real-life geological heavyweight champion. This glacial erratic, basically a massive rock dropped off by retreating ice, measures 85 feet long, 37 feet wide, 23 feet tall, and weighs an estimated 12 million pounds. That's 36 blue whales of solid granite, casually dragged here by ancient glaciers like it was nothing. Scientists traced its origin to a ledge 2 miles away, meaning the last ice age quite literally rearranged the landscape. It's the largest known glacial erratic in North America, and standing beside it feels like meeting a relic from an era where the Earth itself was moving furniture. Fact 37. The lake made of 260 islands. New Hampshire doesn't have oceanfront dominance, but it makes up for it with Lake Winnipesaukee, a freshwater labyrinth containing over 260 islands and sprawling across 72 square miles. Some are full communities with houses, docks, and mailboxes. Others are nothing but rocks with ambitions. The smallest, Becky's Garden, barely measures 10 feet across. You can circle the lake on a 63-mile scenic drive or hop on board the MS Mount Washington steamboat, which still cruises between islands. And yes, the Sophie C, America's last floating post office, still delivers mail across the inland sea. Winnipesaukee isn't just a lake, it's an entire miniature archipelago. Fact 36, Smile of the Great Spirit. The Abenaki called it Winnipesaukee, meaning Smile of the Great Spirit. And when morning light glints across 72 square miles of still water, the name fits perfectly. Every summer, the Sophie C mailboat still zigzags between islands, dropping off letters, groceries, and gossip to year-round residents who check their mail by dock. It's one of the last waterborne mail routes in America, a small tradition that connects a modern state to its indigenous roots and maritime past. Here, the line between nature and nostalgia blurs, and both seem to be smiling. Fact 35, Lake Umbagog's shallow water. Straddling the New Hampshire-Maine border, Lake Umbagog carries a name that's refreshingly honest. In Abenaki, it means shallow water. Despite covering 7,000 acres, Umbagog averages just 12 to 14 feet deep, shallower than many swimming pools. Post-glacial sediments gradually filled what was once a deeper basin, creating a surprisingly flat-bottomed lake where snorkeling often means seeing bottom, even when you're nowhere near shore. The shallowness isn't a flaw. It's created rich habitat within a wildlife refuge famous for moose, loons, and waterfowl. Fact 34, the island that won't sit still. Imagine a forest that floats. On Lake Umbagog, there's a drifting wetland called Harper's Meadow, a massive sponge-like island made of peat that literally moves around the lake with the wind. Trees, moss, and shrubs all grow on top of it, yet the whole thing is buoyant enough to drift like a giant lily pad. It's one of only a handful of floating bogs in North America, and was declared a National Natural Landmark in 1968. From shore, it looks perfectly normal until you come back a few days later and realize it's somewhere else. Fact 33, the Vanishing Stream. At Lost River Gorge in Kinsman Notch, the water plays hide-and-seek with gravity. The river dives beneath massive granite boulders, vanishing underground before bursting back into daylight further downstream. Boardwalks and ladders trace its subterranean path through a maze of natural caves sculpted by glacial meltwater thousands of years ago. You can hear the river rushing below while standing on solid rock, a surreal reminder that not every river stays on the surface. Thoreau called New Hampshire's wilderness a labyrinth of granite, and nowhere proves it better than this secretive, shape-shifting stream. Fact 32, Polar Caves, largest known Ice Age boulder. Near Rumney, what locals call polar caves technically aren't caves at all. So, what are they? Well, they're passages underneath a 25,000-ton granite boulder measuring 110 by 50 feet, widely believed to be the Earth's largest glacially deposited rocks. Ice sheets treated this house-sized stone like a pebble, moving it into place and leaving gaps underneath where visitors now squeeze through on self-guided tours. Even in the summer, the areas remain relatively cool, hence the name polar, producing natural air conditioning that makes exploring enjoyable on hot days. Fact 31, America's smallest coastline. You can blink and miss it, but New Hampshire technically has an Atlantic coastline. It stretches just 18.5 miles, making it the shortest of any U.S. coastal state. Wedged between Maine and Massachusetts, it's a blink-and-you're-gone sliver of rocky shore anchored by Portsmouth, the state's historic port city. Yet those 18 miles pack in colonial architecture, lighthouses, beaches, and enough lobster rolls to compete with any coastal rival. Drive from end to end and you'll be done in half an hour. But the ocean views are so good, you'll wish it lasted longer. Fact 30, the mountain that stands alone. In a state full of ranges, Mount Monadnock breaks the rules. It rises all by itself. The 3,165-foot granite peak towers nearly 1,000 feet above everything nearby, earning its Abenaki name, which literally means mountain that stands alone. On clear days, you can see all the way to Boston skyline 60 miles away. It's also one of the most climbed mountains on Earth, second only to Mount Fuji, thanks to its accessibility and year-round trails. From summit to shadow, Monadnock is proof that even a solitary mountain can capture the world's attention. Fact 29, the Devil's Lunch Spot. At Purgatory Falls in Lindeboro, Geology and folklore collide in the best New England way possible. Next to the falls lies a perfect circular depression called the Devil's Bean Pot, carved over millennia by swirling river currents. Local legend insists it's where Satan himself stopped to cook beans, leaving his fiery pot etched into the bedrock and a hoofprint nearby. In reality, it's a textbook glacial pothole. But like most legends, the truth wasn't entertaining enough, so someone gave erosion a personality. Now every ripple in the granite carries a bit of myth, and maybe a faint whiff of brimstone. Fact 28, the egg that shouldn't exist. In 1872, workers digging near Lake Winnipesaukee unearthed something no one's been able to explain since. A perfectly smooth egg-shaped stone carved with mysterious symbols and drilled clean through the center with machine-level precision. It's smaller than your palm, about 4 inches long, older than anyone can date, and stranger than it has any right to be. Some say it's Native American, others claim it's colonial or even pre-Columbian. Theories range from time capsules to ceremonial relics to alien artifacts, because, of course, over 150 years later, no one knows the truth. It just sits in a museum case, daring you to guess who made it and why. Fact 27, America's Stonehenge. Maybe. Hidden in the woods of Salem, Mystery Hill is one of New England's strangest archaeological puzzles. Stone chambers, standing slabs, and underground passages dot the hillside, and no one can agree who built them. Were they ancient Native American observatories, early European settlers, or just overgrown colonial root sellers with a great PR team? The site is now known as America's Stonehenge, inviting visitors to draw their own conclusions. The carvings line up eerily well with solstices and equinoxes, but the mystery remains unsolved. Whether it's history or hype, it's one of the most debated hills in America. Fact 26, the forest under the sea. Along New Hampshire's tiny stretch of coast, the ocean occasionally reveals its oldest secret. At Odeon Point and Genesee Beach, when the tide drops low, you'll see dozens of blackened tree stumps jutting from the sand, remnants of a 4,000-year-old forest that once stood on dry land. Rising seas drowned it millennia ago, turning the trees into saltwater ghosts preserved in peat. Twice a day, the Atlantic uncovers this underwater time capsule, where ancient cedars and pines still stand rooted in the surf. It's eerie, beautiful, and proof that coastlines are never permanent. Fact 25, Arethusa Falls, New England's tallest waterfall. If you trek into the Pemigewasset Wilderness, you'll find New England's answer to major western waterfalls. Arethusa Falls drops approximately 160 feet down sheer granite, claiming the title of New England's tallest single-drop waterfall. Reaching it takes a challenging 1.4-mile hike, gaining 1,300 feet of elevation, but the payoff justifies every step. In spring, snowmelt turns it into thunder. In summer, it softens into a silver ribbon that glows gold in late light. And a few lucky hikers have witnessed moonbows, rainbows made of moonlight arching through the mist. It's not the easiest waterfall to reach, but it might be the one you'll never forget. Fact 24, Cannon Mountain's aerial tramway. In 1938, Cannon Mountain did something no one in North America had ever attempted. It built the continent's first passenger aerial tramway. The idea of lifting tourists thousands of feet above the White Mountains by cable was so terrifying that officials installed a literal statue of the Grim Reaper at the base. It's still there today, chained to a boulder like a dark inside joke. But the gamble worked. The tram carried millions safely to the summit and proved that high-altitude cable cars weren't just for the Alps. Cannon's 7-minute ride opened up mountaintop views to everyone, not just hikers, and forever changed how Americans experience mountains. Fact 23, Carnivorous plants at Panama Bog. Tucked north of Amherst, Panama Bog is New Hampshire's version of a horror movie in slow motion, if you're an insect, that is. Inside its spongy, acidic wetlands live all 3 of New Hampshire's native carnivorous plants: pitcher plants, sundews, and bladderworts. Pitchers drown prey in pools of digestive fluid. Sundews glue victims to sticky tentacles. Bladderworts vacuum tiny creatures underwater. It's an ecosystem so starved of nutrients that plants had no choice but to turn predator. Fact 22, the forest time forgot. In Pisgah State Park, New Hampshire's largest at 13,300 acres, lies a 20-acre anomaly, a fragment of old-growth forest that somehow escaped centuries of logging. Massive trunks rise from mossy ground, their roots tangled in the remains of fallen giants. These trees predate the American Revolution and possibly European settlement entirely. Most of New England's forests have been cut and regrown multiple times, but this patch survived untouched. There are no signs or fences marking the transition. One moment you're walking through typical woods, the next you're surrounded by living history that's been growing since before there was a New Hampshire. Fact 21. The river that moves like the ocean. At first glance, the Piscataqua River looks calm, until you realize it's one of the fastest tidal currents in North America. Twice a day, the tide rushes through the narrow channel between New Hampshire and Maine at over 8 knots, creating whirlpools, standing waves, and chaos strong enough to spin boats sideways. Locals joke that the river collects a toll for mistakes, hence the nickname Tariff. It's not really a river at all, but an ocean inlet flexing its muscle. From the docks of Portsmouth, you can watch the water literally change direction every few hours, the sea coming in and out like a living thing. Fact 20. Glacial detour for Winnipesaukee. Ever wonder what happens when a glacier rewrites a lake's plumbing? Lake Winnipesaukee used to drain eastward toward the Atlantic, following natural topography. Then the last ice age hit, and retreating glaciers left a debris dam at Alton Bay that completely blocked the eastern outlet. Water had to find a new path, so it rerouted westward into the Pimajawasset and Merrimack River systems instead. One massive ice sheet fundamentally reorganized how New Hampshire's largest lake drains, redirecting it toward an entirely different watershed. Glaciers didn't just carve valleys, they rewired entire drainage systems, permanently changing where water flows thousands of years after the ice melted. Fact 19. Connecticut River's tiny start. The mighty Connecticut River, 410 miles long, flowing through 4 states and shaping entire ecosystems, begins as a puddle you could wade across. High in the mountains of Pittsburgh, just 300 yards from the Canadian border, lies 4th Connecticut Lake, a quiet pond that serves as the river's official source. From this tiny moss-fringed basin trickles a brook that becomes a stream, then a river, and finally the massive waterway that drains all of western New England into Long Island Sound. Standing there feels impossible, that this modest pool is the birthplace of a river that defines half the region's geography. Fact 18. New England's longest tornado track. New England isn't supposed to get long-track tornadoes, but in July 2008, one twister didn't care about the rules. It touched down near New Hampshire's White Mountains and carved an absurd 50-mile path south into Massachusetts, plowing through 11 towns before finally dying out. It became the longest tornado track in New England history by a wide margin. Normally, the terrain here kills rotation quickly, but this storm rode valleys like highways, shredding forest for hours. For a region known for blizzards and nor'easters, it was a brutal reminder. Tornado country doesn't always stop at the Mississippi. Fact 17. The forest that owns a quarter of the state. If you think wilderness means out west, think again. The White Mountain National Forest spans over 750,000 acres across New Hampshire and Maine, nearly a quarter of New Hampshire's total land area. It's not just the largest contiguous wilderness in New England, it's also the easternmost national forest in the United States. Inside are glacial valleys, alpine ridges, endless hiking trails, including the Appalachian Trail, and the rugged Presidential Range, where weather shifts from sunshine to snow in minutes. It's one of the few places east of the Mississippi where you can still vanish into real backcountry. No phone signal, no crowds, just mountain silence. Fact 16. Pittsburgh Big Sky County. In New Hampshire's far north sits Pittsburgh, a town so enormous it borders Maine, Vermont, and Canada all at once. Covering 291 square miles, it's the largest town in New England, and easily the most remote. Every inch lies north of the 45th parallel, halfway between the equator and the North Pole. Within its boundaries lie the 4 Connecticut lakes, the headwaters of New England's longest river, plus unbroken forest and more moose than people. Locals call it Big Sky Country of the East, and they're not exaggerating. Drive through it, and it feels like crossing an entire county. Fact 15. Appalachian Trail in New Hampshire. Over 100 miles of the Appalachian Trail slice through New Hampshire. And ask any thru hiker, this is where the trail gets real. The section through the White Mountains is legendary for its punishing climbs, relentless weather, and jaw-dropping views. The AT crosses multiple summits in the presidential range, including Mount Washington, where a sunny morning can turn into a freezing gale by noon. It's brutal, breathtaking, and brutally breathtaking. Hikers say New Hampshire either humbles you or hardens you forever. One stretch, from Mount Pierce to Mount Washington, is pure wilderness theater, thunder, lightning, fog, and glory. Fact 14. Mount Washington Cog Railway, world's first. Back in 1869, engineers pulled off what many called lunacy. The Mount Washington Cog Railway, the world's first mountain climbing cog train. Skeptics dubbed it the railway to the moon, certain it would never work. Yet 150 years later, it still does, grinding its way 3.5 miles up the steep face of Mount Washington using a rack and pinion system that looks like Victorian science fiction. Steam engines still puff smoke into alpine air, hauling passengers up grades so steep you'll feel like you're tilting backward into the clouds. Since opening, more than 5 million riders have trusted this machine to defy gravity, and somehow it always has. Fact 13. Steepness of the cog. The Mount Washington Cog Railway's track averages 25% grade, peaking near 37% on the steepest sections, Jacob's Ladder, making it one of the world's steepest railway lines. Only Switzerland's Mount Pilatus Railway is steeper. To visualize 37%, you're climbing 37 feet vertically for every 100 feet of horizontal distance traveled. That's hiking trail steep, not railway steep. Riding the cog means tilting backward in your seat while the engine groans and grinds its way upward at walking pace. Looking out the window at the sheer drop beside the track isn't recommended for anyone with height anxiety. Fact 12. Presidential train ride for Grant. When the cog debuted in 1869, most people thought it was a death trap. Then, President Ulysses S. Grant showed up and rode it. Fresh into office, he boarded the brand new railway straight to Mount Washington's summit, effectively endorsing one of the strangest engineering experiments in America. His trip transformed public opinion overnight. If the president trusted this train to the clouds, maybe it wasn't madness after all. That same year, the Tip Top House Hotel opened on the summit, still standing today, cementing Mount Washington as both a presidential retreat and the country's first true mountaintop tourist destination. Fact 11. The road with no wrong turn. If New England had a scenic hall of fame, the Kankamaga Scenic Byway would be a unanimous first ballot inductee. Locals call it the Kank, a 34.5-mile stretch of Route 112 that snakes through the White Mountains with no traffic lights, no billboards, and no bad views. It climbs nearly 3,000 feet, weaving through forests and valleys that explode in color every fall. Photographers line the pull-offs, chasing that perfect moment when sunlight turns the hills into fire. Officially, it's the Northeast's first National Scenic Byway. Unofficially, it's the road that defines autumn in New England. Fact 10. Winnipesaukee New England rank. Never has a runner-up looked so dominant. At 72 square miles, Lake Winnipesaukee isn't just New Hampshire's largest lake, it's New England's third largest, trailing only Vermont's Lake Champlain and Maine's Moosehead Lake. That makes Winnipesaukee a genuine regional heavyweight. Impressive, given New Hampshire's relatively compact size. Only 2 New England states have bigger lakes, which says something about Winnipesaukee scale and importance. The lake dominates central New Hampshire, driving tourism economies, supporting recreational boating and fishing industries, and essentially defining summer for everyone within driving distance. When New Englanders reference going to the lake, there's a good chance they're talking about Winnipesaukee. Fact 9. The Granite State's granite problem. Here's one of New Hampshire's best geological ironies. Mount Washington, the crown jewel of the Granite State, isn't made of granite at all. Its summit is built from schist and quartzite, rocks that began as ancient ocean sand before being crushed and baked by tectonic pressure. Around 250 million years ago, the collision of continents pushed these layers skyward into a range that once rivaled the Rockies in height, roughly 15,000 feet tall. Millennia of erosion later, we're left with 6,000-foot peaks that are really the worn-down stumps of ancient giants. So when you stand atop Mount Washington, you're not on granite. You're standing on the ruins of a prehistoric mountain empire. Fact 8. Republic of Indian Stream. During the 1830s, unclear border surveying between the United States and British Canada accidentally created a no-man's land in northern Coos County. Local residents, perplexed whether they lived in America or Canada and tired of both nations taxing them, declared independence as the Republic of Indian Stream. They wrote their own constitution and governed themselves as a tiny independent nation for several years. The US and Britain finally resolved the border dispute in 1836, placing Indian Stream territory definitively within American boundaries. For a brief, bizarre moment, New Hampshire hosted an accidental micronation within its borders. A footnote where bad surveying and international confusion created a republic that existed purely because nobody could agree on a map line. Today, it's just part of Pittsburgh, but for a few years, this corner of New Hampshire was technically its own little country. Fact 7. Pittsburgh west of the Connecticut. Here's another geographical oddity. Pittsburgh contains every single piece of New Hampshire land located west of the Connecticut River. South of Pittsburgh, the Connecticut River itself forms the entire New Hampshire-Vermont border, meaning everything on the western bank is Vermont. But north of Stewartstown, the river bends east, creating a wedge of New Hampshire territory on what would normally be Vermont's side, squeezed between Vermont proper and the Canadian border. This isolated block exists purely because of how surveyors drew boundaries. So if you're standing in New Hampshire west of the Connecticut River, you're guaranteed to be in Pittsburgh. There's literally no other option. Fact 6. Mother of Rivers. Ever wonder why New Hampshire is often nicknamed the Mother of Rivers? 5 of New England's major rivers originate in the state's Granite Highlands: the Connecticut, Merrimack, Androscoggin, Saco, and Pemigewasset. These rivers flow in every direction, west into Vermont, south into Massachusetts, east into Maine, making New Hampshire the hydrological heart of New England. Even Maine's mighty Androscoggin and Saco trace their origins back to the White Mountains. Add in 1,300 lakes and 40,000 miles of streams, and the nickname Mother of Rivers stops sounding poetic. It's just geography. Fact 5. Upper Connecticut Lakes. All 4 Connecticut lakes, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, reside within Pittsburgh's boundaries, serving as headwaters for the entire 410-mile Connecticut River. These mountain ponds connect through short streams and wetlands, feeding the river's first trickle that eventually grows into New England's longest waterway draining 4 states. It's humbling standing at 4th Connecticut Lake, the highest source. This cold, clear mountain water in one of New Hampshire's most remote corners begins a journey that won't end until reaching Long Island Sound, hundreds of miles south. Every drop starts here. Fact 4. The only New Hampshire-Canada crossing. If you want to drive from New Hampshire into Canada, there's exactly one place you can do it. And of course, it's in Pittsburgh. The tiny road heading north towards Chartier, Quebec, serves as the state's only official border crossing, complete with a small customs station surrounded by wilderness. Every car, truck, and snowmobile crossing legally into Canada has to pass through this remote gateway. The rest of the border? Just forest, lakes, and moose trails. It's fitting, really. The state's largest, northernmost, and wildest town. It's also its only international doorway. For most New Hampshireites, Canada feels far away. For Pittsburgh, it's literally the next driveway. Fact 3. The river that belongs to New Hampshire. Here's a boundary twist almost nobody expects. When you're paddling down the Connecticut River, you're actually in New Hampshire, not Vermont. The 1933 U.S. Supreme Court settled a centuries-long feud between the two states, ruling that the entire river belongs to New Hampshire, right up to the low water mark on Vermont's western shore. The fight dated back to colonial land grants and competing charters, each claiming different sides of the river. Vermont argued for a halfway split, but New Hampshire won. The result? If your kayak touches water between the banks, you're still in the Granite State, and you don't cross into Vermont until your paddle hits its mud. Fact 2. The famous 48. There's no better symbol of New Hampshire's wild soul than its 48 4,000-footers, the mountains that scrape the sky above 4,000 feet in the White Mountains. For hikers, summiting all 48 is a rite of passage, a badge of endurance, and a lifelong obsession. Each peak offers its own test: brutal climbs, sweeping alpine views, and weather that can turn instantly from bluebird to blizzard. Finishing the full list earns you entry into the 4,000-Footers Club, a tight-knit community of climbers who've seen the Granite State from every summit worth conquering. In a place where mountains outnumber cities, these 48 define the land and the spirit of New Hampshire itself. Fact 1. Second most forested state. New Hampshire is the second most forested state in America by percentage, trailing only Maine. Roughly 83% of the state is covered by trees, a higher percentage than notoriously wooded states like Oregon or Washington. This cosmic woodland includes everything from coastal spruce forests to northern hardwoods to boreal fir stands. The forests support a massive timber and paper industry that's been an economic engine for generations. Yet, they keep regenerating. New Hampshire even produces more toothpicks than any other state, a quirky byproduct of all that wood. The dense tree cover creates habitat for wildlife from black bears to Canada lynx, and makes New Hampshire feel genuinely wild despite its small size. What about 50 wild facts about North Carolina you didn't know?